Joining me now, I have Vice President of Policy at the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, Blaise Misztal, and Andrew Peek, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Iraq and Iran. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for your time this morning. Andrew, if I could just start with you, just speaking of White House messaging on this conflict, the Strait of Hormuz is a bit confusing right now because you have the president, calling on all these allied countries to come in, help us reopen the strait. But yet at the same time yesterday, he said, we don't need the strait. We have all the oil we need. So which is it?
Well, I think it's true that the U.S. doesn't get the majority or very much at all of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. I think also that since oil is a fungible commodity, the more oil that comes out going to wherever, mostly Asia from Hormuz, the greater effect it'll have on the price of oil. I do think there's an interesting thing going on here, which is that if Iran narrows down the number of countries that it, quote unquote, prohibits from getting oil, then you're not really in a much worse situation on that particular subset of the problem than any latent situation in the Persian Gulf where Iran threatens the world supply of oil, right? The oil's still going out. Iran says it could stop it, but it won't. That's pretty situation normal. So I actually don't think the Hormuz threat is as bad as people have made out.
Blaise, let me play a bit of sound for you. President Trump calling out the UK and other NATO countries for rejecting his request to help secure the strait. Take a quick listen to what he had to say.
We spend trillions and trillions of dollars on NATO to defend other countries. And I always said, but if it ever comes time to defend us, they're not going to be there. Many of them would not be there. And we're going to have to start thinking more wisely.
Of course, need to point out that NATO allies did join the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan after 9/11, airstrikes in Libya in 2011. But Blaise, what do you make of these countries staying on the sidelines this time around and the impact that has on relations with the United States?
Hey, good morning, Markie. If you think back to the end of World War II, Winston Churchill came here to the United States and gave a speech in which he coined the term the special relationship to refer to the partnership between the United States and the United Kingdom, making the case that they needed to work together to bring peace and stability to the world after the war, and that they would always be partners. And I think what we're seeing right now is, unfortunately, the unraveling of that special partnership and the blossoming of a new one. We're seeing that the United States has a new partner that is willing and capable of acting to protect U.S. interests in the American homeland, and that's Israel. And I think it's unfortunate that our European partners, the UK, France, and others, in what seems like a fit of pique, are refusing to participate in that, even though they suffer just as much from high oil prices that are being caused by Iran.
Yeah, so is it not a matter of if they're going to help, but just when? I mean, if this is hurting their oil economies and gas prices at home too, will they at some point? It's just a matter of when we see that happen, Blaise.
Yeah, I think it seems unlikely at this point, given both their politics and their capabilities. These are countries that I think largely lack the military investments to be able to help the United States in a region so far away. They are helping defensively, help protect some of the airspace. But I think they are both focused on the war in Ukraine and lack the military capabilities to send a large deployment to the Strait of Hormuz that would actually be helpful at this time.
Andrew, we certainly are dominant militarily over Iran, but it does seem like the Strait is the strategic choke point and chokehold at this point. What is Iran's game plan here? Just to keep control over that and keep that closed in perpetuity until, the White House tires of war or tires of high gas prices here at home?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's right. It's an asymmetric war objective because as long as Iran can survive and keep allegedly and to some extent disrupting the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, it can claim victory when the U.S. Either declares victory and goes home or escalates. There's the Marine force reportedly on the way from Asia, escalates in some way and then eventually goes home, presuming that they're not going to march on the regime. So so this is a very low cost objective for the Iranians. Now, the flip side is that also there are outcomes of the war. For example, if the U.S. takes Karg Island, that leave it in very much a stalemate, which is not to Iran's advantage. In that case, you have, well, Iran has an asymmetric objective because they can threaten the flow of oil, but the U.S. also has a chokehold, even more of a chokehold on Iranian oil production. So it is a low-cost objective. They think they're making progress on that, but they too have vulnerabilities that haven't been exploited yet.
Blaise, Joe and I have been talking this week about Israel mentioning and claiming they have at least 3 more weeks of fighting left in them. They have thousands of targets still ahead. Just given JINSA's focus on the U.S. Israel relationship, I'm curious what you think of our coordination right now between Washington and Israel. Are we still in lockstep, or do you think a gap in objectives is starting to emerge here?
Yeah, I think operationally we're seeing an incredible coordination with hundreds of U.S. Advisors and planners embedded in Israel, Israeli soldiers embedded here in the U.S. at CENTCOM headquarters, enabling that division of labor between the U.S. and Israeli air forces operating smoothly over the skies of Iran, each with their own set of targets. I think the question of whether there is strategic alignment is still an open one, given, as you reported earlier, President Trump seems to articulate different war objectives at different times. I do think the fundamental objective of making sure that Iran is left with no nuclear and no military capabilities when this war is over is shared between the two countries. I think the question is there an objective beyond that? Is there an objective to make sure that this regime falls? Is there a willingness to accept a diplomatic agreement with Iran at some point? I think that's where it's unclear where the U.S. and Israel stand.
And Hannah, let me bring you back in on that, because Blaise makes a point about just diplomatic relations and what could possibly be on the table on the horizon. Has the White House closed that window of possible diplomacy, or what are we hearing about an off-ramp?
Yeah, we've heard sort of mixed messages on that front as well, Markie, because the president really says that at this point he's just not interested in negotiations. But other reporters are reporting that there are some discussions at least starting to emerge, starting to happen again. So what we're really seeing from the president is he says no diplomacy is on the table at this moment. Negotiation time is gone and over with. But we're hearing, there may be a possibility of that on the horizon at least.
Andrew Peak, Blaise Misztal, along with Joe Khalil, Hannah Brandt, thank you all for your time.